Welcome to Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem.
I'm Shannon Lawrence.
And I'm MB Partlow.
Quick content warning before we get started. This podcast may contain language and disturbing content, so enter at your own risk. Hi.
Howdy do.
I found...
Uh-oh.
No, a little... It specifically says Japanese and Korean market off Powers, and I think it's Carefree. I would say Carefree.
Like behind a gas station?
Yeah, there's a little strip mall.
And it's, I know, I've never been in it, but I know exactly where you mean. How is?
We drove by and I was like, that's it. I know when I go, because I wanted to find the texture, the rice cakes with the chewy texture. Because
I love those.
I'm very sensory seeking about chewy texture.
I know several places you can get them. Oh, you don't like Trader Joe's, but you can get them there too.
So we went in there and I found the rice cakes and many other things. So many other things.
Yes.
So we brought home all these goodies for the kids and just like busted them all open for this dessert thing and had a bunch of desserts. But I got it and I got some like add water and microwave or whatever also. Jakbaki or whatever it's called. It's like TEOKBEOKK.
Okay.
Something like that. So it's what I had at the
the rice cakes
Korean
in the blazing
yes.
hot.
So I got the blazing hot, but I also got the plain rice cakes to cook myself. And and I got these ginger crackers, and they're absolutely magical because I'm so hooked on ginger since I had to use it for being sick all the time. So,
have you ever had fish cake?
Yes.
Fish cake.
I didn't find fish cake.
It's a similar texture. I don't know how to cook it. I don't know what to do with it. I'm sure I could Google it and figure it out. But
the directions on the back of the rice cakes are in Korean.
Yes,
so I was like, well, I will look online and see how I prepare because they're actually hard. And they're not frozen. It's refrigerated, but it's hard. So I'm like pasta, I imagine. I'm going to put it in there and I'm going to cook it and I'll boil it.
Oh, if you're ever in a absolute funk, go to a Korean restaurant and order the wonton and rice cake soup. It is like so much carbs. I mean, it is just a carb, but it's like it's an eggy, oniony chicken broth, and it's full of these chewy rice cakes and these big sloppy wontons that are nice and chewy and falling apart. Oh my God. I'm like, it's the best.
But also, did you see the Savages don't own Yuka anymore?
I did.
Yes. Now,
surprisingly.
Panyanahan.
Yeah, they renamed
Cafe
it.
or something like that. Yeah.
I did see that. I haven't been out there in forever.
Yeah, it's very far.
It's a fur piece.
Yeah. But the person was like, I'd never even had Filipino food before I bought this. And I'm like, oh, fuck.
Oh, that's a yay.
I really want to. The whole reason it was magical before is that his wife, Mrs. Savage, was Filipino.
Oh my God, that food was so
I'm
good.
like, they may be losing me, but it's only one or two places I can get halo halo. And I went there and got something they called halo Halloween. Which had
of course you did.
Ube ice cream on top of it. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Now I'm hungry. Which I shouldn't be because I just ate lunch. Can I tell you something funny that happened today?
No.
As I was getting ready for the podcast, I'm going to tell you anyway. You know it's a river. You can throw a stone in and say no, but you can't damn it.
That's correct.
With one word. No, don't tell me anything funny.
No, don't tell me something funny.
So, getting ready for, got my morning. I'm getting ready. And I get a text from a friend who says, fuck almonds. And I was like,
oh, was it because of I said that in an episode?
So I look at that and I go, okay, is this an anaphylactic situation and I need to be concerned? That's my first thought. And then I thought, has he mistyped this and doesn't even mean almonds? So I sit there for a sec and I'm like, question mark, question mark, question mark. Send that out. I'm binge listening to back episodes of the podcast. Oh. And I went, well, if you were ever wondering whether or not I was opinionated, I guess you have an answer now. Actually, I may have first replied, fuck the patriarchy. Because we worked that one in a lot.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, justifiably. It needs
because
to
the
be
more
said.
you read about crime, so much of it is crime against women in some awful.
Oh my God, there was an article in the New York Times this morning about elderly populations in prison, because prison is not set up for people over 50. Because prison is no shit. Prison ages you faster than regular life. And so they consider at 50, you're a senior citizen. So they were talking about, and you can't qualify for Medicare or Medicaid while you're in prison. So the state has to pay for all your care.
Right.
And they had these people that they had profiled for this article that they had talked to. And I'm looking at the crimes and I'm like, okay, this woman killed her husband and she's been in prison for a scabillion years. And I'm looking at all the white collar criminals who fucking rape the general public to the tune of millions of dollars, and they get a week or a year and then they, flutter off. And I'm like, what did this woman really do?
Like, did she kill him for money or did she kill him because he was beating her? Like, that's a question right there.
That is a question. And this one guy he's in his 60s and he's been in prison since he was 17.
For what?
I'm trying to remember what he was in for, and I cannot. Because it was such a depressing article.
Well, it was pointed out recently. They were like, so, suddenly drugs are legal and all this, but that didn't change the people who were convicted for drug
for having a joint.
Crimes that are no longer crimes. You know how much money we could save just by being like, oh, let's boot everybody who got busted for marijuana, for example, right?
Yeah.
And they're out of the prison system, and then suddenly of course, you kick somebody out of prison, they're still going to be reliant probably on the government in some way, because it's really hard to start a life with a charge on you like
yes,
that.
it is.
A conviction.
There are some employers that will take that chance. They will also get tax breaks for taking that chance. So, and substantial tax breaks. So there are places you can go. There are things you can do, but it's not easy. And you have to find a place to live. And who wants to rent to a felon?
Yeah.
If you can even afford the rent, which in this town you probably can't. And then you've got parole officers who can and will inspect come to your place of work and come to your place of residence anytime they want to make sure you're toeing the line, which is what they're supposed to do. That's the whole point. I'm not saying they shouldn't be doing that, but that's just another level that's a low level fear you live with, even if you're not doing anything wrong, knowing that at any minute somebody can come in and just fucking rip your life open and inspect it right down to the seams.
Yeah. Right. There's a lot of violations.
Yes.
And for some of them, it seems like they're justified, but it rarely seems to be for the ones that it would be justified for. Like, will they repeat this will this person who raped 20 women just get out and rape 20 more? Yes, most likely they will, because that's not a thing that goes away.
Yeah, and we've talked about a lot of people who got caught and sent to prison who had been in prison before, but, they were sentenced to 15 to 30 years.
And they served 2. Yeah.
I'm like, what? I don't.
Well, they were on their best behavior. You know why? There was nobody to rape that was of their preference.
Yes.
So,
speaking of being in jail, not prison, remember Johnny Worthen? Mm-hmm. How can you forget Johnny Worthen? Have you ever read any of his stuff?
I don't remember.
Okay, I picked up a book of his off my enormous TBR pile. I could build a fucking fort with my to be read pile. So that was on the top, and I was like, it's The Finger Trap. That book is fucking hilarious.
Oh, that's good.
It is so funny. And there's a piece where the main character goes to jail, and it's just, it shouldn't be, but it's hilarious.
Okay.
And what his inner thoughts about it, and he might have to go to prison, and
I picked up a book by an author I like normally, and it's a book of horror comedy short stories, and boy, are they falling super flat for me. Yep.
Who is it?
Jeff Strand.
Oh.
Almost that. But I like all his other books, so it's fine. Just one. Maybe it's an early one or something like that, and I don't remember what it was called. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
There's some big mystery author who just came out with a horror book that got panned. as not being scary enough or something. But I recognized the author's name, and I can't remember what it is. And I was like, have I read any of their mysteries? I think I have. But I was like, now I want to read the horror book, because I'm like, if somebody went into it expecting it to be very much like their mystery, then they might not appreciate.
That's the thing, yeah, if you've changed something up. Once you're established.
People don't want to.
Yeah, they have expectations.
How dare they?
Yeah, so I don't know. That's the tricky thing. That's why authors pigeonhole themselves, but I don't think I'm going to be good at that. So I'll take it. I'll just take it when they get upset about it. Yep. That's fine. And that's the thing Jeff Strand has talked about, like in his, he did kind of a writing memoir type thing.
Oh.
And he was like, yeah, I write different things, because he does full horror, he does horror comedy, he does kind of that adventure series, which you can't. It has horror elements, but it's really probably not considered horror. So, and he's like, I want to write what I want to write, and that's what I want to do too. So, it's just going to be what it's going to be, I guess.
Yep.
I thought about doing a whole bunch of different names, and I may end up with a pen name for one set or something at some point, but I don't know. It's a lot of work.
It is.
I have to have a second website and another Facebook and, all that stuff. And I'm like, I don't want to.
No.
So we'll see.
I'm willing to do hard work, but I'm not willing to do
unnecessary
hard peripheral work.
Yeah.
It's like, writing is hard enough. Why do we have to add 147,000 steps to make everything around it harder?
Yes. But that's what it seems like. Isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. I guess go ahead and start.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I am going to talk about the Poet of Wichita.
Okay.
I love Kansas. So, unreasonably, I love Kansas. So, have you ever heard of Fort Scott, Kansas?
No.
Probably. I was going to say probably not. It's not very big. It's near the Missouri border. It's a little over 100 miles east of Elk Falls, Kansas.
Oh.
Which is the home of
I know exactly where we are now.
That's the home of the annual Decorated Outhouse Festival.
I should go there and sell my book.
Yes, you should. Oh my God, yes, you should.
Look at it, right on the cover.
So my biggest fear is that someday Lucy's going to leave Kansas and I will no longer have these tidbits to pass along. She, Thing 1 and Thing 2 did go to the festival one year.
Oh, nice.
I want to go. I mean, it's in the middle of nowhere, Kansas, and it's but they both have t-shirts and I'm like, I kind of want to go.
Right?
It's tiny, but Kansas has all these weird little festivals. So maybe I'll someday just get over my morbid fascination.
They just love a festival, maybe.
Kansas, but I doubt it. That was a very light lead into a not light topic, but So since we're in Fort Scott, we're going to go back to October 15th, 1946. So World War II was well and truly over, but the world's zeitgeist was still massively fucked up from it. Feel that's fair to say. 16-year-old Ruth Smock was carrying groceries home to the boarding house where she lived. She entered the building, then heard the screen door open and close behind her. A man grabbed her from behind and started pulling at her clothes. She later said the man was tall, he wore bib overalls, and looked to be about 50 years old. So, all props to Ruth, she fought back, which is not something everybody did in that day. It's not something everybody does now. She had the presence of mind to fight back and tried to jam her thumbs into his eyes. I'm like, you fucking go, Ruth. The man yelled, I'll fix you so that no one will look at you again, and knocked her out with a chloroform-soaked rag. So as she was swooning, as she was losing consciousness, she sees him heating a flat iron on the stove as she's losing consciousness. So when she woke, she had burns on the insides of her thighs and bleeding scratches on her face, her arms, and her legs. And she went home, recovered her at her parents' home, and the man was never found. We have to talk about journalism in 1946 because it sucked hard. Her name and the details of her injuries were printed in the local paper. I'm like, what? Who made that fucking decision?
Has journalism ever not sucked?
Possibly. But yes, there are journalists who do not suck.
They're
this
individual journalists. Yeah,
yes.
sure.
So I couldn't get, and I really worked this for a while. I couldn't get the full article. I know that in the article, but there were like clips of the article, like photos of the article, but it wasn't the whole article. I know that the word rape was used, but I don't know if it said the police suspect she was raped, the police don't suspect. So I have no clarity on that point whatsoever. I'm just going to say, fuck the men who wrote the articles, fuck the editor, and fuck the publisher.
Okay.
That makes me feel a tiny bit better. They took her humiliation and published the details for everyone to see. So fuck them, their children, and their children's children. Yes, I'm really pissed off about it. I'm like, why take a bad situation to make it worse?
Because that's what journalists do.
So,
in my recent experience.
So, like Chumbawamba, she got knocked down, but she got up again. How often do I work Chumbawamba into anything?
You know, maybe that's the first time.
See? Anyway, after moving away in 1950, Ruth married Ed Finley. They moved to Wichita. They had 2 sons, and Ruth eventually got a job at a Southwestern Bell telephone company. Life went on. Their neighbors liked them. They were very quiet people, and they both came from extremely hard, rural, kind of hard scrabble backgrounds. They wanted to be seen as responsible and modest, polite, and ordinary people. That they just wanted to live a quiet life and be left alone. Fast forward to a steamy June night in 1977. Ruth is home alone, and they made a big deal about this. She had not been home alone hardly ever. I mean, her 2 sons are now grown and out of the house. But what happened was earlier in the day, Ed collapsed while doing yard work and had been rushed to the hospital, and they think he's had a heart attack. So she is home alone. Just a very unusual situation for her. And the phone rang that night, late in the evening, and she fears it's the hospital calling with bad news. Because even today, nobody calls you late with good news. Nobody calls me late with good news. That is not what she got. The man on the phone asked if this was Ruth Smock from Fort Scott, Kansas. When she confirmed, he began reading aloud the newspaper article from her attack. He said he found the clippings when demolishing a house in Fort Scott, and he threatened to tell people about the attack if she didn't pay him.
Oh my God.
She hung up on him. That just sent me, I had to like put the computer down. I had to get up and walk around. I probably, if I were so inclined, I would have punched the drywall. That's how mad that made me. So I know that you know what was happening in Wichita in the late 70s. But for everyone else. What? The PTK Strangler. Because you've talked about him.
Yes.
And at this point in time, he had already killed 7 people. And so the city is on edge, and people are very scared, justifiably so. Later that summer, an envelope showed up at Ruth's workplace with the newspaper clipping about her attack. She began receiving harassing phone calls, and in August, a man followed her on the street and said, "I'll see you again, you can count on that. Some people's fantasies are other people's nightmares."
Okay.
I just would have... I don't know what I would have done. Yeah. So the phone calls continued, and Ruth would hang up as soon as she heard a man's voice. And if her husband answered the phone, it was just a hang up. At this point, she has not told her husband about the phone calls.
Oh, okay.
So in June of 1978, Ruth's stalker tried to grab her on the street, but she got away. She called Ed to pick her up, and she finally told him what was going on. So he made her go to the police, and they filed a police report. In October, she got another letter with threats and demands for money. The next week, another letter with a poem. The police checked the letter for fingerprints, but otherwise really weren't paying much attention to this. They're kind of like, okay, whatever. On November 21st, 1978, the man who attacked Ruth made another appearance. He leaped out of a Chevy Bel Air and abducted Ruth during her lunch break from work. Another man drove them around, and the man in the back seat with her eventually hit her in the head with a chunk of concrete. After 4 hours, she convinced her captors that she needed to use the bathroom, When they got out of the car, she sprayed them with pepper spray and ran off.
Nice.
I'm like, I didn't even know they had pepper spray then. 78.
Yeah, I guess.
I don't know.
I don't know when they started using pepper spray.
Yeah. So, now I'm like, oh, why didn't I look that up?
1947. I don't know.
But if you say it authoritatively
That's
enough,
right. Then it'll sound right.
Bitches will believe you. So, Ruth called Ed, who had been frantic since she disappeared from work. They called the police, who went to the location where Ruth escaped, and they found her sweater, they found her shoes, and they found her footprints, but they didn't find any other evidence. The police did take her more seriously this time, but they still couldn't turn up any clues. Police began to suspect that Ruth's stalker might be the BTK strangler, since there was an overlap between the letters from each. Mm-hmm. So one of the poems Ruth's stalker sent was, "Wherever you go on water or land, you still got to pay or I tell about your brand. I am smart and know things to do. You talk to people I despise, like police lieutenant and telespies."
Okay.
Timeless
really pushing
stuff.
your poetic license there, buddy.
Yes. And it's obviously, some of the words are misspelled, which is why I'm stumbling through it. I didn't practice this in front of a mirror at home. So.
Shame.
I know. You slacker. In July of 1979, Ruth was attacked in a parking lot, and the poet tried to force himself into her car. He threw a shopping bag into the back seat that contained rope, tape, a red bandana, and half a bottle of wine. That threw me.
Okay.
When Ruth struggled, he stabbed her 3 times with an 8-inch knife. In fact, when Ruth got to the hospital, the knife was still stuck in her side.
Jesus. So because she was a victim of something, she got just constantly victimized again and again and again.
She was in the hospital for 9 days, during which time a nurse reported that a man matching the poet's description came to the nurse's station twice to inquire about Ruth.
Ew.
Ruth got more police protection, but they made no progress on identifying her stalker. So over the years, and he sent lots of poems. I did not feel the need to
read all of
them or read every note. It was just that was a good sample. But over the years, several different police officers were in charge of the investigation at different times. Someone would get transferred or get promoted out of the department or whatever, so it would go to someone new. So some of them became very close to Ruth and her husband and stayed in contact with them. Like, the officer and his wife became friends with the couple, and they had dinner together, and they were like family. Ruth continued to receive letters and poems through 1980. Their home phone lines were cut, and a 12-inch knife wrapped in a red bandana was sent to Ruth's office. More than 300 suspects were investigated, and Ruth's case finally gained national attention. In spring of 1981, the Wichita media started asking questions about why the poet hadn't been caught, why this woman was still being harassed. In September of 1981, the case got a set of fresh eyes. Police Chief Richard Lemunion, who had been aware of the case while it was going on, he had not directly worked on it. He had been assigned to other things. So they get another letter, and the poet has now threatened Lemunion's wife, Sharon, who was going to be next as soon as he finished with Ruth. So the letter also proved that the writer knew the make of Sharon's car and the route that she drove to and from work each day. So the police chief, this man, is like, fuck this. He takes all the enormous pile of case files home for the weekend, spreads them out. I mean, this is like Harry Bosch. Uh-huh. Who writes Harry Bosch? I can't remember the author's name. But Harry Bosch, he solves cold cases, so he'll take the case files home and go through everything and just sit there and read through them and make notes and who was here and who was where and what was done. So, at the end of the weekend, Lemunion believed he knew who the poet was. It was Ruth. One of the things he noticed was that there were never any witnesses when the poet assaulted Ruth. Never. Any. None of the neighbors on their quiet, dead-end street had ever noticed anything. When the police placed a camera in the Finleys' backyard, the poet stopped showing up in the backyard. whenever the Findleys went on vacation, so apparently the poet would also send messages in the local paper's classified section. When they went on vacation, they'd stop. And they wouldn't start up again until after they got back.
Uh-huh.
So eventually, and nobody wanted to believe this. All these officers who had worked with these people for years, they were like, no, it cannot be.
Is this like a criminal version of Munchausen's or what?
Sort of. So eventually they, and I'm really boiling this down. Eventually they got permission to follow the Findleys because they weren't certain if it was Ed or if it was Ruth. They followed them as they ran errands one day, and they stopped and dropped some letters in a post office box. So it turns out 2 of those letters were from the poet. I'm like, for Christ's sake, she got it from the same book of stamps as the electric bill she paid.
Uh-huh.
Ed was questioned first, took a polygraph, and was cleared of knowing anything about what was going on.
Right.
Ruth confessed to sending the letters, although her memories of the events were foggy. So she's like, yep, but I don't understand why I'm doing this.
Okay,
we're going to get to that. But here's the thing. I can't remember the figure, but it was hundreds of thousands of dollars they had spent on investigating this. But police and public opinion overwhelmingly agreed that Ruth needed help, not punishment.
That's good because she did.
That's really good because she really did. Thank God she was white.
Yeah.
Or she wouldn't have gotten that. So she was taken to a psychiatric hospital, and through therapy, it was revealed that she had suffered sexual abuse as a child, where her abuser, who was a family friend and neighbor, had tied her to the bed with a red bandana and had later gagged her with the same red bandana to silence her.
The red bandana.
So that's where the red bandana came from. She was in the psychiatric hospital for 6 years getting treatment. She actually started, her method to process this was she wrote a lot of poetry. That's where it all came out. I know. I think it had to have been better. Anyway, her husband, both sons, some of the police, and several family members stood by her the entire time she was undergoing treatment.
Okay.
So she was allowed to heal and to come out the other side. She spent her later life knitting for the U.S. troops, which I was like, well, that's a very World War II thing to do.
Yeah.
I'm like, really?
Did you also sew a new flag?
I was kind of like, I can't imagine our troops going, could you knit me something? Could you whip me up a little something?
Really need some knitting.
I need some socks.
I need that more than my food, socks, and porn.
Anyway, so knitting for the troops and translating books into Braille.
Okay.
And I'm like, that takes some doing.
Yeah.
But, so she was trying to be productive. She was trying to make up. And really, when you think about it, yes, she wasted the public's money. She didn't hurt anybody except herself.
Yeah.
And she could not figure out how to process this. The whole case just made me so fucking angry. And she passed away in 2019.
Oh, wow.
So that was the poor, sad ending of the Poet of Wichita. Now, my sources for this were Medium, my True Crime a Day calendar, because this went on for days on the True Crime a Day, and I'm like, what's going to happen next?
Oh, jeez.
And then I get to the end, I'm like, fucking no, that is not, no. Anyway, the True Crime database, and I'm sure I looked at Wikipedia, because how can you not?
How can you not?
It's nigh on impossible.
Nigh on impossible. Yeah, wow. She should have gotten help way sooner.
She should have, and it was really funny because, not funny, haha, but peculiar. Because once it came out, they questioned the attack on her when she was living in Elk Snout. No, Fort Scott. But I'm like, that's so extreme, branding herself with the iron. Mm-hmm. And nobody knows. She never, to my knowledge, talked about that, except to say that it happened. That this was something that had happened to her, and she wasn't going to entertain any notion that she made that up.
You're right.
But the question was asked, so. But Yes. So what lighthearted follow-up to that do you have?
Sure not.
No.
So this one's, it's, there's a good story, but I'm just warning you, it's also sad. So.
Am I going to cry?
I don't know. So I'm covering the Stayner Brothers. This is once I saw that these two things had happened in the same family, I knew I needed to cover both of them separately. So this is part 1, and then we shall continue part 2 in the next episode.
Next week.
That's right.
Dun, dun, dun.
We've done stories about cursed families before,
Yes,
and I've certainly felt at times that my family was cursed. But the Stayner family dealt with some unimaginable things. So if anybody was cursed, I'd like to know what witch they pissed off at some point.
Uh-huh.
Our story starts in 1980, where we're going to go into the past and then into the future with this one. We're going to bounce around a little bit between these two especially. On March 1st, 1980, an almost 15-year-old boy walked into a police station in Ukiah, California, holding the hand of a 5-year-old boy. They hadn't been able to find Timmy's house. As police spoke to the boys, and Timmy was that 5-year-old, they realized something awful had happened. They sat the older boy down and gave him something to write with. His written statement started, quote, "My name is Steven Stayner." Stayner was misspelled. "I am 14 years of age. I don't know my true birth date, but I use April 18th, 1965. I know my first name is Steven. I'm pretty sure my last name is Stayner, and if I have a middle name, I don't know it." End quote. Stephen had been going by the name Dennis Gregory Parnell, but his birth name was Stephen Gregory Stayner. He was the middle child out of 5 with 3 sisters and 1 older brother, who we'll talk about next episode. On December 4th, 1972, Stephen had been walking home from school in Merced, California. He was 7 years old. A man named Irvin Edward Murphy, who had been handing gospel tracts out to the other young boys, walked up to Stephen and said he was with the church and was trying to get donations. Stephen said his mom would happily donate something. A car pulled up, kid. Sure, my mom will, because the guy asked him.
And it was this, when was this? The 70s.
70s.
Yes, so you would have.
In the early 70s. A car pulled up, driven by a man named Kenneth Parnell, who offered to give them a ride to Stephen's house. He was friends with Irvin, and both he and Stephen climbed into the car. Only Parnell didn't drive towards Stephen's house. Instead, he drove for about half an hour, taking Stephen to his own cabin in Kathy's Valley. That night, Parnell molested the young boy, not yet fully raping him. That would begin 13 days later. He spent about 2 weeks grooming him. Throughout the first 2 weeks there, Stephen kept asking to go home. Finally, Parnell told Stephen that he had legally adopted him because his parents couldn't afford to have 5 children anymore and had given him up.
What a fucker.
Yep. That's also when Parnell told him his new name was Dennis. While Stephen had mentioned that he didn't know what his birthday was, he must have in the beginning, because Parnell would go on to use his real birth date when enrolling him in school in the future. And notice he kept his middle name the same, Gregory. He did these little things, right?
Right.
Irvin, or Uncle Murphy, as Stephen would refer to him, that's the guy who first approached him with the gospel tracts, was only around for about the first week and was kind to Stephen and never laid a hand on him. He didn't live there, so I don't think he even knew what was happening. There's more, but he actually worked with Parnell at Yosemite National Park. And by the way, both these stories are also going to involve Yosemite National Park. But still, he was a special needs adult. So this guy had taken him at Irvin, the one who did the gospel tracts.
Okay.
And Parnell was a minister and had convinced him that they needed to take Stephen from this bad situation and bring him up in a Christian way.
Okay.
He thought in some way that he was helping this boy, right?
I understand it now.
Parnell had trouble staying employed, so moved Stephen to new cities often. So he was like this, I don't even know if he was a real minister or if he was just claiming to be a minister, but he had these gospel tracts, so he might have been, a lot of them have also other jobs. So he moved Stephen to new cities often. He would go to his jobs and leave Stephen on his own, where he is not tied up or anything of that sort. But he thought he was adopted. He thought this was just life now.
And he wasn't even 10 years old
yet. He was 7 when it started.
That's just...
So he had no reason to run. Also, Parnell always found somewhere remote to live. Just so it's clear, they weren't living in suburbia. He couldn't go to a neighbor's house. This was just his life, and so he went with it. And he didn't even know how to go about, like, how do you know as a child like that in the middle of nowhere? How do you know what to do or what to ask for? What do you do? This guy adopted me and I don't like him. Like,
right.
As a child, your rationale.
And would adults have even believed him?
No, probably not. He was allowed to drink alcohol, smoke, do all this stuff, and free to go wherever he wanted. He was also, of course, being molested throughout this time. Yeah. When he was 9, Parnell moved a woman named Barbara Matthias into the house. Matthias raped him 9 times during the 18 months she lived there along with Parnell. Yeah. When he was 10, Parnell sent Matthias to kidnap one of Steven's friends from the Santa Rosa Boys Club. I mean, he was even in clubs and stuff, but again, he thought he was adopted. But the boy didn't take the bait. Throughout the years, Parnell had tried to use Steven to get other boys into the car, becoming increasingly uninterested in Parnell as he got older. But it had never worked. As an adult looking back, Steven admitted he had purposely done things to sabotage Parnell without him finding out. Parnell got pissed off, calling him incompetent, and on February 14th, 1980, he went out with a friend of Steven's, Randall Sean Poorman, who he had promised to pay for his help in cash and drugs, but he also heavily threatened, and returned with little Timmy White, the 5-year-old. Poorman had nabbed the 5-year-old when he was playing in his own front yard. He fought, but no one heard his screams, and Poorman was able to get him into the car. Parnell told him his new name was Tommy and dyed his blonde hair brown. Timmy was very upset throughout the next couple weeks, clearly, and wanted to return home. Wanting to spare the little boy what he'd gone through, Steven waited until Parnell went to work at a hotel clerk night shift position on March 1st, 1980, and that's when he and Timmy started their walk into town from the remote cabin in which they were living. They walked a ways until a trucker pulled over, and the trucker gave them a ride into town. Timmy remembered how to get to his babysitter's house, but not his parents', and so they went to the babysitter's house, and she wasn't home.
Oh, God.
Steven used a phone book in a booth to find the address for the police station and then he got there and he tried to send Timmy in alone, and Timmy was approaching the front, and then he got scared and he ran back to Steven, who at that point, Steven had probably been protecting him for 2 weeks now. So this is, yeah. An officer inside saw what was happening, was suspicious of the teenage boy, and went out and brought them in, and that's when the story unfolded. Police arrested Parnell the next day. Parnell had been born in Amarillo, Texas in 1931 during the Dust Bowl. In 1951, he had been convicted of impersonating an officer with a badge bought from a military surplus store. Why were they selling it there? And sodomy for raping a boy who he lured into his car with a badge. So, in other words, he had gotten in trouble before. We just talked about this.
For the exact same thing.
He claimed that he had raped the boy because his wife at the time was pregnant, so he had to go elsewhere for sex. Yeah, he actually was married a couple times. He had a couple daughters who lived with the wives. His exact words were that he needed to, quote, find a different outlet. I just found that deeply disturbing. Parnell had also been convicted of armed robbery while living in Utah. Parnell did get convicted for the 2 kidnappings, but was never tried for his sex crimes against Steven. There were various reasons for that. One being statute of limitations, of course, was so short on sexual crimes for a while.
Yep.
And also because he was moving around, jurisdiction was an issue. Luckily, Steven had gotten Timmy away while the grooming was still underway, and the little boy had not been raped. Parnell was sentenced to 7 years for Timmy and 7 months for Steven.
Okay, I'm not going to cry. I might throw up a little and get really mad.
The crying comes later. Serving only 5 years total. A pedophile served 5 years total.
A multiple convicted...
He served less time than he victimized Steven. I just want to be clear about that. The man Steven had called Uncle Murphy received 5 years for his help with the kidnapping, but served only 2. In that case, he served the same amount of time as the actual pedophile.
Yeah.
Steven always felt that Murphy was just as much a victim of Parnell as he was. Parnell had lied to him and taken advantage of him, and I can't believe how little time Parnell got for this. Sean Poorman was sent to a juvenile work camp for his kidnapping of Timmy, because he was like 14 when he did it. Yeah. Barbara Matthias wasn't charged. Yeah. The best I can figure, this was due to the statute of limitations on the sexual crimes. But let's be very clear here. Barbara Matthias, so you don't forget her name, raped a 9-year-old. She claimed he didn't know he was kidnapped, and I'm like, what the fuck does that have to do with you raping him.
No, there's no connection between the two.
I don't care if you knew he was kidnapped. No. You had sex with a 9-year-old.
That's just...
Ugh. You sick bitch. Like,
yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, allegedly. In 2003, story's not done. Parnell had long been a free man. He was 71 and had emphysema and diabetes, plus lingering issues following a stroke, so he had a caregiver. He tried to get this...
I hope he had bleeding hemorrhoids.
I hope a lot of things. He tried to get this caregiver to take $500 and buy him a 4-year-old boy for sexual reasons. The sister went to her sister, the caregiver, Diane Stevens, and they worked with the police to set up a sting. Parnell used $100. He already had secured a fake birth certificate with $100. I'm like, how did a 71-year-old know how to go get that? Which is why he was specific about the age. Because I was like, 4-year-old, that's oddly specific. That's why, because he had already spent $100 getting that birth certificate. And then he wanted to buy the child with the remaining $400. He had the money when he met with the undercover cop and was subsequently arrested. He claimed to have just wanted to have a family, though things he'd said, such as requiring the 4-year-old to have a, quote, clean rectum, end quote, indicated otherwise.
Okay, throwing up is back on the table.
This damning evidence brought him a new conviction in February 2004 for human trafficking and attempted molestation. He had pornography in the vague, quote, sexual aids, it said, in his home, and I'm like, what is that? Like... A lot of people have sexual aids in their homes, so I don't. Anyway, that have been taken as evidence as well and helped get the conviction. Because California had the 3 strikes law by this time, thank goodness, on certain things at least, this final crime got him a 25-year sentence.
Good.
He didn't even get the boy, and he got a 25-year sentence. He served 2 years for holding someone captive for, what, 7 years?
Yeah.
He died of natural causes January 21st, 2008, age 76, while still in custody. Here's the part that makes me sad. Neither of his kidnapping victims lived as long as he did. Oh. And I find that a disgusting shame. They were both returned home on that fateful day in March when they showed up at the police station. Though Steven misspelled his name, they were able to find his parents. However, returning home after 8 years of being a pedophile's prisoner wasn't easy. No. He was just shy of his 15th birthday when he returned home. And his parents wanted to treat him like the 7-year-old he'd been when he disappeared. Accustomed to having complete freedom and being allowed to drink and smoke and do all of these things, he didn't take well to them trying to control him, and I'm sure they were being uber protective, which would have worsened it, and he's already at an awkward teenage age, right?
Yeah.
His father, you're going to hear more about his father in the next one. His father's a dick, and he basically continuously maintained his son didn't need therapy. He just needed to get past it. So he only very briefly got me, and he never opened up about what had been done to him sexually during his time there. Eventually, his fucking parents kicked him out of the house because of his drinking and his attitude problem. Why do you think, maybe, let's not get him therapy for this fucking awful thing he went through. Let's kick him out of the fucking house.
No.
Yeah. He had already dropped out of school due to other kids bullying him for having been molested. It did appear elsewhere he might have finished school or gotten his GED or something, but I couldn't see. There were just a lot of mixed messages on that. When he was 19 or 20, he married his 17-year-old girlfriend, and they had 2 children together. But on September 16th, 1989, he got into a car accident while he's on his motorcycle. The car fled the scene with a witness following him, and the driver abandoned the car and climbed into another person's car who took off. The witness was unable to follow any further, but called the police, alerted them to the car, and it was registered. Sadly, Stayner died an hour after his accident from his head wounds and internal injuries, as he had no helmet on. He was 24 years old. According to an LA Times article, the driver, Antonio Loera, did eventually surrender himself since they knew who he was and was sentenced to 90 days in jail, plus probation and $100 to be paid into a trust fund for his part in the accident. The LA Times article said his car had been stalled and Steven ran into it, and then other articles said he pulled out in front of the bike, and I'm like, okay. The LA Times, I don't know which one's right.
Yeah.
Timmy, who was the same age at that time as Steven had been when he saved him, 14, was his pallbearer.
Jesus.
They had both testified. I know.
Jesus Christ.
They had both testified against Parnell in the case involving them, but Stayner was dead when the 2004 charges occurred. Timmy was able to testify again. And Steven's testimony from the first trial was read to the jury.
Good.
Which surprised me that this was allowed, but I'm happy it was.
Yes.
Because damn right. Timmy became a police officer in adulthood, married, and also had 2 children. He forgave Poorman for what he'd done, the teenager.
Okay.
Likely feeling the same as Steven had about Murphy. The Poorman, when it all came out, his family had been threatened and all this stuff. So it's still not great, but he was a teenager, not a full-grown adult.
Yeah, he was, what,
14 and how many
or 15?
Yeah, and how many grown adults have succumbed to threats like that instead of doing something that
you
makes
threaten
sense?
my family, I'm going to lose my fucking mind.
On April 1st, 2010, when Timmy was 35, he died of a pulmonary embolism.
Oh, God.
Yeah. It's so sad, I know. During their short adult lives, both Steven and Timmy gave talks and tried to educate children about kidnapping risks. Steven consulted on the miniseries made about his story called I Know My First Name is Steven, starring Corin Nemec. Yeah.
I remember hearing about that.
And he actually did a small cameo as one of the cops. While his adolescence and had been understandably troubled with no support from his parents, he had become a well-respected man. He was well-liked. After his death, locals set up trust funds for his 2- and 3-year-old kids.
Oh.
After his death, they said he never whined or complained about what had happened to him. He never used it as an excuse. He had to grow up real fast.
Yeah.
It sounds to me like both men overcame and tried to live good lives where they spoke out to help others and to keep them safe. And it's a real travesty they both died so young. They didn't get to see their own kids grow up.
That is awful.
Yeah. On August 28th, 2010, a statue was dedicated to Steven and Timmy for what they had survived. I've already scheduled out the photos. There are photos of the tribute. It stands in Applegate Park in Merced and depicts 14-year-old Steven holding 5-year-old Timmy's hand. It was weird, like, the word hero was never in the articles, but he clearly was one.
Yeah.
So, next episode, we'll be discussing Carrie Stayner, Steven's older brother, and this is going to take a completely different direction. Sources: Wikipedia, The Spokesman Review, People, LA Times, and UPI.
I mean, this is a tragic story, but, I mean, he worked to thwart. It never should have happened to him. It never should have happened to Steven. But he worked to thwart the guy getting other kids. And then when push came to shove and he did get another kid, he helped the kid escape.
Yes.
And have his own parents. I mean,
I know in the 80s, like, counseling and therapy still had this weird negative connotation. But there's a lot more psychologically when you look into it. And when I was reading all this stuff, him not wearing a helmet, people had said, you need to wear a helmet. But he had this if I die, I die, So clearly there were things that were still impacted, yes. I feel like. And maybe if he'd gotten some care and some help, he would have been wearing a helmet. He died of head injuries.
Yes.
And that sort of thing.
And a lot of people back then, and especially before then, if you had trouble with your child, you might say, call your brother, Bill, who lives on a farm, and say, look, we're just having fucking fits here with...
Boy, you don't know. There's something that's going to come up with that in the next piece.
Okay, I do not know. But I mean, that was not... if you couldn't... If there was a problem, or say your daughter...
Or your parents, or...
Yes, send them to the grandparents. Or your daughter is hanging out with someone who you do not want her hanging out with. Well, sweetie, for the summer, you're going to go stay with Aunt Gladys.
Yeah.
And I just wish his parents had been able to say, okay, if we can't deal with this... we will get you to somebody else who can. Yeah. Because they sound like just pieces of marriage.
Apparently the dad, when Steven was gone, was a complete mess. Like, he's the one who fell apart and the mom kind of held stuff together better.
And I can't fault him for that, but you got to take turns. First of all,
I do still fault him for his.
Well, you know,
but at the same time,
don't.
she didn't stick up for him and say no, he should go in counseling. So even though, because it was one of the sisters who said my dad just would say he doesn't need therapy. Yeah, he absolutely fucking does need therapy. He went through something you can't imagine.
Yeah.
But the dad is also a piece of shit for other reasons. Yes. Okay. And that'll come up briefly in the next one. But yeah, just there's so many things wrong with the story that these two boys didn't 25 and 35 was it? I said something like that. 24. Well,
and the story I talked about, it was a family friend and neighbor who tied her to the fucking bed with a red bandana.
Yeah.
And molested her.
But that's usually who it is. That's kidnappings.
Yes.
Molestation, all that stuff.
It's usually somebody known to the family.
Yeah. Oh, and something I forgot to put in there. This is killer. When he first got...
I can't take anymore.
When he first got kidnapped, Steven, the first place he was being kept, the cabin where Parnell lived first, turned out to be basically neighbors. Steven didn't know until he was back home with his grandfather, with Steven's grandfather. He was like a few hundred yards from his grandpa.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Do you imagine what it would feel like to be that grandpa and discover that later? No, that
I can't even, that's...
Yeah. So...
Oh my God.
Like to find that out later and just be like, I was right there. But of course, how could you know? You never saw him.
No.
So...
And if you knew your neighbor and knew he didn't have kids, you wouldn't suddenly start looking for kids.
Yeah.
And if he... Wow.
So, yeah. So, a sad story, but out of it, basically really two heroes, because he saved Timmy, and then they both put their stories out there, and for Steven especially, that had to have been hard, considering what was done to him, and to try and help other people. And I was like, I wonder, considering the timing and the boom of, you're all going to get kidnapped in the 80s, right? How maybe formative on that they were and his story was, because it was a very public thing. Because nothing like the kid coming home to finally get a kidnapping story in the national press, right? Yeah. That's when it hits the net. Not when they're missing. No. But when they miraculously save themselves and walk up to a police station, that's when it became a national story. So... And the police did search extensive. Like, I didn't include that in the story, but obviously there were searches by the police and stuff. But it was a half hour. I actually mapped it to see about how long that drive would be, about 30 minutes to where he was. But then Timmy became a police officer because he wanted to make sure that he could help people the way he felt he had been helped by the police in the end. And like, they both could have turned in very different directions. And yes, Steven did briefly as a teenager who was traumatized, but... And that's the part that even though it's all very sad, I want to leave it with like the good that they did. And maybe they saved some people's lives ultimately and never knew it. We don't know. But they talked to kids and they told them how to stay safe and what to watch for and all of that good stuff. So, all right. So thanks for listening to this
uplifting episode of Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem.
We'll talk to you next week.
And we'll try, well, I don't know that it'll be uplifting.
But it'll end at least on a different tone.
It will end on a different tone, and I will do everything I can to make it amusing.
All right.
All right. Talk to you next week.
Check us out on buymeacoffee.com/MMMayhem. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem.
Find us on Facebook and Instagram or at our website, mysteriesmonstersmayhem.com.
Please like, rate, and review, follow, and share wherever your favorite podcasts are downloaded.
Thank you for listening and supporting our podcast. We'll be back next week with more shenanigans.